This video's gonna contain spoilers from the off, so I'm warning you now. The finale of Season 2 of Severance has just landed, and with 100% of Season 2 now being released, it calls for a celebration, right? In the words of Jame Eagan, today is most definitely a momentous day. Within this finale, we finally got an insight into what Cold Harbor was. We had Innie and outie communicating with one another. Helly, or could that be Helena, staring the woman whose husband she's gonna run off with directly in the eye whilst holding a smile as Gemma cried out for Mark. Mr Milchick reaching his last nerve, and MDR and CNM joining forces whilst leading the uprising inside of Lumen. It was honestly one of the best season finales to a TV series that I've seen in such a long time. To the point where the tiniest piece of dialogue had me feeling emotional, and the progressive tempo change from start to finish had me just feeling excited and screaming at the TV. So with that, let's dive into this finale and discuss all things Severance Season 2 Episode 10. The birthing cabin scene. The scene in the birthing cabin was one of the most creative that we've seen the show carry out. We got to see a conversation between Mark's innie and his outie in a way which started off in a time-consuming way, with the both of them needing to video record each of their responses and then step outside of the birthing cabin so the outie could receive the message on the video camera. But then, as the scene unfolded, we saw that it started to flow like an actual conversation, and with them being opposite each other and it transitioning seamlessly, it genuinely felt like a real conversation. This was the scene where Innie found out that because he hadn't completed Cold Harbor yet, it meant that Gemma was still alive. Innie had no idea why he was in this birthing cabin and what Miss Cabell wanted with him, but it was after listening to Mark scout and hearing that he was crucial to the rescuing of Gemma where we saw the true moral dilemma of the season come to fruition. This was again the value of an innie's life when compared to an outie. We saw it a lot with Helly and Dylan in this season, with Helly having her body taken over whilst on the severed floor by Helena, and her feeling used. And we also saw it with Dylan in feeling like he deserved some kind of life with Gretchen, but we hadn't properly seen it with Mark. That was until now. With Mark Scout's plan to rescue Gemma, it meant that once she was saved, they could then prove that she was kidnapped, and it would mean that Lumen would essentially fall to their knees and collapse because they'd be exposed for it. Whilst in reality, it sounds like the optimum plan because Mark and Gemma get their happy ending, and it's been what the whole season has essentially been about. In practicality, it would mean that if Lumen no longer existed and the severed floor shut down, then all of the innies that were on the severed floor would cease to exist. Meaning that their lives, albeit they may not be the ones that are the most fulfilled, however they still hold value, and they'd be shut down without even a second thought. Innie's lives hold value because they have connections with other people, relationships, emotions, and memories which ultimately make them their own entity, as their outies know nothing of them. Innie said a line, "We find ways to feel whole, whatever this life is, it's all we have." But in this wider plan that Mark, Devon and Cabell were cooking up, the innies were just an afterthought and were seen as disposable. One outie's life would be saved, but it would come at the cost of every single innie. Outie Mark did actually say that he would go through with the reintegration so Innie could share some kind of life with him, but we found out through Devon that he was actually lying about that. So Innie was right to be skeptical. What started as a conversation that was filled with intrigue and smiles because some kind of barrier was being broken with an innie speaking with an outie, we saw it transform into one that was filled with hostility and tension. I thought when outie referred to Helly as Heleny, and the fact that Innie was bothered by it, it was a moment which was just so human. And I know they are humans, but it showed that sense of care that Innie had towards Helly, and the fact that he felt as though he was being used because outie had never made an effort before. But now, because he was relying on his innie, he was doing everything that he could. Trying to be personable, when in reality he didn't actually care. It was a dynamic that's never really been shown to us before. When it came to the structuring of this scene, having outie outside in this dark, cold environment and having the innie inside of this warmly lit, cozy environment in front of the fire, I felt like it was symbolic of not only the innie and outie names that they have representing where they were, but also the situation of the dynamic that they now found themselves in. Plus, it felt like it was also foreshadowing the darkness that Innie would adopt right at the end. Outie holds none of the power anymore because his innie chose to stay with Helly inside of Lumen, and outie was nowhere to be seen, which symbolized that dark, cold place. Another way that this scene was constructed perfectly was with the way that the camera would move ever so slightly closer to both the innie and outie Mark's face as the scene went on. This really allowed that intensity to come to the forefront and enable it to feel like the pressure was building. But with it also really focusing on their eyes, I feel like it shone a light on the fact that despite the both of them sharing the same appearance, what was going on the inside of their mind and behind their eyes was completely different. What is Cold Harbor? It was also during the cabin scene where we found out what the entire point of Mark's work was and how it was connected to Cold Harbor. So it turned out that all of the numbers that Mark would get feelings for when looking at the screen were essentially the makeup of Mark's wife Gemma. It was a doorway into her mind, hence why the numbers would be put into crates because they all represented different tempers such as sadness, woe, frolic, malice, and dread. It was essentially the building blocks of her mind, and every file that Mark completed, it would pretty much form a new consciousness and personality for her. Hence why we saw her acting completely differently and not truly remembering anything when she would enter these different rooms on the testing floor. Mark and Gemma's entire purpose was to complete the 25 different refinement categories, and then once they were done, the both of them would be eliminated. That's innie Mark, not the outie, and then Gemma would die after it was completed. The reason that Gemma would die on its completion would be because she was pretty much the host of this new Severance chip that had 25 different individual personalities on, and Dr. Mauer was set to extract it from her, something that we've not seen done before and most likely came with deadly consequences. The Cold Harbor room was one that we were constantly left wondering what was behind the door throughout the entirety of the season, and when Gemma finally walked into the room, we saw that it was an empty room that only had a baby's crib that was in it that she was told to dismantle. She was made to wear the clothes that she wore on the day that Lumen took her, which was around the time that Mark and her lost their unborn baby, as if to strike up some sense of emotions. Plus, the song I'll Be Seeing You, which played over episode 7 when Mark was dismantling the crib and caused her to remember the emotions and feelings of Mark taking it down in the present day due to the loss, was also played in the room. But the thing that was most interesting about the Cold Harbor room was that as Gemma walked in there, she didn't know who she was or what she was supposed to be doing. Something that both Mauer and Jame referred to as beautiful. There was a barrier that was holding within her mind, and it was as if this personality was one that was a blank state, and one which numbed you to pain, suffering, and the memories that could make you feel like that. The stimuli around Gemma, such as the crib, the music, and the outfit, was something that showed that the outie Gemma was buried so far beneath that she was unreachable. The intention of extracting the chip would be to most likely roll it out to the public, and then implement it into those that were willing to get it. The possibility of adopting multiple different personalities means that for many different tasks in life, experiences, or scenarios, one could simply switch to an alternative personality to allow them to be free of whatever fear or pain it could be, and for the other personality to bear the burden of it, showing again that the innie was the one that would suffer the consequences. With Mark entering the room, we saw that the spouse, as the doctor referred to him as, was the stimuli that caused her to crack, and for what was the momentous day to be ruined. Gemma has the chip in her mind that Lumen has spent a lot of time and effort in perfecting, and now she slipped out of the stairwell exit and is on the cusp of freedom. So it ended up becoming the opposite of a momentous day. Mark completing Cold Harbor with Helly. The scene where Mark completed Cold Harbor was one that I didn't expect to get so emotional over whilst watching. This moment was 2 seasons in the making, and I think that's why it felt so powerful to watch as it was unfolding. At this point, we didn't know if innie Mark was going to go through with the rescue mission of Gemma, and then once Helly arrived on the severed floor, honestly, I questioned it even more. As this scene played out, we saw the both of them pretty much reflecting on their time together and explaining to one another the different experiences that they went through the previous night. This was with Mark being in the birthing cabin and what would happen once he completed Cold Harbor, and also with Helly and how James said that he saw Kia in her, something that I'll touch on in the next section of the video. But as well as that, we also saw them mention how they cared for each other and that they wanted to live with one another. Helly had almost made peace with the fact that Mark needed to go, but it was something that neither of them truly wanted. She said, at least you'll have a chance at living, which was in reference to the reintegration program that he could have potentially been going through, but still, it wasn't enough for Mark. With Helly saying the line, "But I'm her," when Mark said how he wanted to live with Helly, it almost showcased that Helly was a different kind of innie to the others because of the fact that she was the daughter of an Eagan. meaning that no matter how much they wanted to be with one another, it just simply wouldn't be possible. This also tied into Harmony saying, "There'll be no honeymoon ending for you and Helly are, Mark S." With the way that this scene played out, I feel like it can only be compared to a scene that you'd see in a TV show or movie where a character is dying and they're saying their final words to their partner. And honestly, it genuinely felt like that. With the line, "I wish we had more time," being spoken by Helly, there was a sense of grief that was overshadowing the entire scene. And then later on in the scene with Helly saying to Mark, "See you at the equator." It was a line that was just simply beautiful. Helly even referenced the first conversation that she ever had with Mark in Season 1 Episode 1 when referencing Delaware and seeing if she could think of any other places. They both joked about the equator, and in the moments of jest there was just a deep sense of reflection and emotion where it felt like their time together was truly coming to an end. A moment that compared in emotion to this was when the alarm was going off right at the end of the episode, and amongst all of the chaos, Helly stopped, looked up and smiled as if she was proud of the fact that Mark had almost completed the rescue mission. With Cold Harbor being completed and the 25th file being finalized, we obviously saw the celebrations commence with the robotic wax model of Keir thanking Mark and hailing him as one of the most important people in Lumen's history. Something which was also supported by the mural of Mark about to press the final key whilst in front of Woe's Hollow, surrounded by all of the employees that he's interacted with during his time at Lumen, showing that he was a true part of the company's history. Helly and Jame. There were so many good interactions between many of the characters in this episode, whether it be Drummond and Lorne from Amalian's Nurturable, Milchick and Dylan, and even Mark and Gemma at the end. But the interaction between Jame and Helly was the funniest for sure. Yep, it beat Milchick running out like a school kid rushing to break. Helly literally calling Jame out to his face for being extremely weird was something that actually made me laugh out loud. What I thought was going to come from this interaction was that Helly was going to be given the opportunity to essentially live her life under the overtime contingency protocol. Jame essentially said to Helly that he didn't love his daughter and that he used to see Keir within her, but he gradually left her as she grew. This was also where we got some clarity on James' usage of the birthing cabin and that people would be one of James because he said that he'd sired many others in the shadows, meaning that he produced more children in the hopes that they'd exhibit the traits of Keir and potentially take over the reign from him instead of Helena. However, with him saying that he saw Keir in Helly, it insinuated that he valued the innie more than the outie and that she'd achieved something that no other person had when it came to showing the values of Keir. This is something that will definitely be interesting to keep an eye on moving forward. If Jame values Helena's innie more than her outie, then that could put Helly in a difficult situation. She's got the chance to be able to live the life that she's always wanted, not the half-life that she's currently existing in. So I wonder if the prospect of having more than just Lumen would be something that would interest her. I think not though, because of the lack of respect that she has for the Eagans and the fact that she thinks Jame and Helena are both monsters, but it's a subject matter that I think will definitely return in the next season of the show. Jame didn't explain why he was there when Helly asked, but I think it's because he plans on using Helly's existence due to the Keir that he sees within her. The ending explained. Honestly, the ending of this finale was even better than the Season 1 finale, which was a task that I thought was going to be difficult to do. With C&M dancing away and playing their music, we saw that Helly and Dylan were doing their best to keep Milchick locked in the toilet to prevent him from getting back into MDR and interfering with Mark. Milchick ordered the band to stop and to go back to their departments, which they were planning on doing. But it was only once Helly rallied them up and gave them an inspiring speech about them having half a life and being viewed as disposable and like they're not willing to fight for it, where afterwards Milchick did break free. However, he walked out to Dylan leading an army against him, showing that the workers of Lumen were now prepared to participate in some kind of uprising, and to not bow down to the higher-ups because they can often come with deadly consequences, as many of them experienced with the likes of Irving and other team members randomly disappearing. This is something that will most definitely continue into the next season of the show. The workers have the upper hand right now because they outnumber management. I just wonder what their intentions are and what their endgame is, because surely they're going to have to leave at some point, and then when they do, it's going to be hell for them when they get back, unless they do plan on staying on the severed floor for an elongated period of time. With Mark holding the psycho that was Mr Drummond hostage after he quite literally tried to kill him. Honestly, I didn't expect that from Drummond. All because Mark tried to get into a door, he was prepared to end things for him. It was a bit of an overreaction, as it would have meant that the outie would have been killed. But I suppose it did tie into the fact that Mark's service was done for Lumen, and they were going to get rid of him, just like what Harmony Cabell said. What I liked about Mark's hunt for the exports hallway was that it mirrored what we saw in the opening section of the first episode when he was confused due to everything just looking the same. And this was the exact same in this situation too. He wanted to find one specific location, but even with directions, the white walls and maze-like structure of the severed floor was dominating his mind. As he got to the testing floor, we saw that Mark's innie switched to his outie like we expected, but as it did, the stun gun that Mark had went off because as he transitioned, it must have caused his finger to twitch, so the trigger was pulled, and then that meant that Mr. Drummond ended up being no more, and Mark was covered in his blood, something that came in handy because when he was outside of the Cold Harbor door, he was able to use the blood on his tie to get in. When Mark and Gemma laid eyes on each other for the first time, I just felt overwhelmed with this sense of emotion. Mark believed that his wife was dead for the longest of times, and now he was seeing her for the first time in several years in a state that he never thought that he would. I didn't even know if we'd see them reunite in this season, so when they did, it just hit so hard. The fact that she didn't recognize him due to Cold Harbor was something that I didn't know if it would interfere, but we saw that she followed him and ultimately left the room. That was then where we got to see their true reaction. As both Mark and Gemma ran for the elevator to go back to the severed floor, which is where the innie would take over Mark and Miss Casey would take over Gemma, Dr. Mauer shouted, "You'll kill them all," when the door shut. This could be interpreted as the innies on the severed floor being killed due to Lumen potentially being exposed, which is what Mark, Devon and Harmony said could happen. Or it could be Dr. Mauer referring to the 24 different personalities that he got to know of Gemma, and the fact that if she steps outside and just returns to the outside world as Gemma Scout, then every personality that he came to form a connection with would no longer be accessible, and they'd all essentially be killed. So I think it could be referring to that too. We saw that Mark fulfilled his mission of rescuing Gemma and got her outside of the stairwell, but when it was his time to go, he hesitated, and as he turned around, Helly was there. Honestly, when I saw her in the background, I groaned, because I knew there was no chance that he was going to leave now. The one person that was going to keep him on the severed floor and away from his outie's life was now right in front of him. Helly did say that she wished that they had more time together, and it seems like they're now going to get it. With Gemma screaming in the background for Mark to go outside and to be with her, the roles were now reversed, where the Mark that she knew was trapped on the inside, and now she had the freedom on the outside. The nature of the act that Helly did in being so cruel to Gemma by leading Mark away, which is something that she's not usually like, it does make me think that the Glasgow block could well have been enabled and Helena could have taken control again. We know how much Helena cared for Mark, as she'd never really experienced the kind of emotions outside that she did when she was with him, and she ultimately did commit a cruel act before to be with him by betraying him and also Helly. So there's nothing to say that she wouldn't do it again, especially if it meant that she got what she wanted. I'd also say that because earlier on in the episode, Helly was seen to say, "But I'm her," when Mark said that he literally wanted to spend more time with her and to be with her. I wonder if that was something that the showrunners wanted us to take quite literally. Or if it was Helly, could the betrayal that she committed be because it connects to what James said at the start of the episode, where he said that he saw the fire of Keir within her. It felt like a true Eagan act what she did at the end, and if it was in fact Helly, it could show that she does have Keir within her, despite the fact that she might not want it. Mark and Helly linked arms and then just ran down the hallway like Mark did in episode 1, like he did in the finale, and like he did with Gemma only mere moments earlier. I was devastated for Gemma, but it showed that innie Mark was taking control, and he wasn't prepared to die for the sake of one person. And he also wasn't prepared to allow every single innie on the severed floor to spend the rest of their existence in the eternal dark, because the severed floor would no longer exist. I do wonder though, if Gemma is on the outside, is this Mark almost showing that he'd rather die alongside the rest of the innies than just walk away and potentially go through the reintegration process? Because, at least this way, he gets more time with Helly. It could well be. Mark showed that the value of the life of an innie is one that matters, and that even if it's perceived to be a nightmare on the outside, there's beauty in what they do have, even if it's not much. Showing that their existence is enough to warrant value and for them to not be seen as disposable. The innies now hold the power for the first time in the show, and it's a dynamic that's going to be so interesting to return to. with the song The Windmills of Your Mind being what played over both Mark and Helly running at the end. Not only did it connect to the fact that within the show the subject's mind is at the epicenter and is confusing, but the song is said to be about somebody who's confused about what they should do next, and that perfectly encapsulated the position Mark was in those final moments. My review of the episode. I thought this was simply a phenomenal episode of the show. I think it could be the best that the show has ever produced. It's up there with episode 4 and episode 7 of this season for sure. The pacing of it was something that I was just so impressed with. The first half was all about immersing us into it slowly, with the scene in the cabin, the scene in MDR with Mark and Helly, and also with outie Dylan finding purpose in the innie Dylan, and the fact that he was a motivating factor for him to be a better version of himself. And then the second half, from the moment that Cold Harbor was 100% complete and the band came out, all hell broke loose. And whilst the mystery wasn't there as much, it didn't need to be, because it was action-filled, exciting, and emotions were just fizzing everywhere. One thing I would say that I'm a little bit gutted about is that there was no Irving in this episode of the show. I'm hoping that means that we're going to actually see where he went when the show returns for season 3. I just hope the character's okay. Honestly, with the uprising taking place and it seeming like it's going to be a battle of the employees versus the higher-ups at Lumen, there's the potential for a great season opener, and whilst talking about a battle, the scene where Dylan screamed and came out of nowhere to save Helly by pushing the vending machine in front of the doorway was just perfect. That Dylan scream is genuinely iconic at this point. We also got that dance scene that we were all waiting for. I didn't think they'd one-up the one that we got in season 1, but this one was just perfect. Milchick absolutely owning the space had me in stitches, and despite it contrasting everything that we've come to see at Lumen in terms of the design, tone and mood, it just worked so well. Emotions were at the heart of this episode for me, and they hit most when Helly and Mark were having what felt like their final moments with one another. The darkness that surrounded the room and the sheer light that was just focused on their faces really allowed what they were feeling to be captured, and the sadness that was present to come to the forefront. I'd also say that when Mark and Gemma were with each other after what felt like 2 seasons in the making, the smile that Mark had and the embrace that they had together was just filled with love, passion and relief. That whole scene where Mark was navigating the testing floor was one that I thought was just incredible. Seeing Mark being covered in blood really contrasted the white, everything that was there. When it came to the offering of a goat, that was something that wasn't necessarily 100% cleared up, but it seemed like in this instance the goat was being offered as a sacrifice so that it would be able to guide Gemma once she had her chip extracted and she died at Kyr's door, making me think that the goats are essentially viewed as sacred and their purpose in Kyrism is that of guidance. Lorne said, "How many more must I give?" which makes me think that they've tested on a lot of people and many people have died in the process. But I imagine we'll learn about the goats when the show returns for season 3, as there were even statues of them at Salt's neck. It's a poignant figure with that of the Joker too, so maybe Kyrism's lore will be delved into more. I hope so. This season of Severance has been one hell of a ride, and it finished with the greatest of crescendos. I'm absolutely devastated that it's finished though, because it's provided some of the best TV that we've not only had this year, but we've had for many years. It's definitely the best show of the year so far, and it's going to take a lot to knock it off the top spot. With Ben Stiller saying that it's not going to take another 3 years until a new season gets made, I'm hoping that that is actually the case, and we'll only have around a year or a year and a half, which in today's day and age is quite good. Before I finish the video, I do want to say a quick thanks for tuning into all of the breakdowns that I've done on Severance. I know there are a lot of people that are covering it, so it means a lot that many of you came back every week, watched the video, and then dived into the comments with your theories. It's just been great reading them and diving into them with you, so thanks. So, there you have it, Severance Season 2 Episode 10, Ending Explained. If you want to see every episode of Severance Season 2 being broken down, then click on the card in the top corner. There'll be a playlist there. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. What did you think of the finale? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.